afternoon, people. We are getting ready to start the panel, which also means we are ready for me to hand over to the young people who I have been co-curating with. So first of all, I'm gonna name the people who have helped to plan the day. Jamelia, don't walk away. And then we will invite the panel up so that we can start. So in turn, producing with me is Jamelia Wisdom-Bacco. We also had 4 co-curators. Awolola, who I saw, yes, please come onto the stage. Courtney, Conrad, who is one of our shadow judges, is also going to be moderating this panel. The other young people who we've been working with, Maya Chowdhury, Kamran Sajid, Luke Worthy, Lauren Aspery, Connie Greig, who is not here, Lara Mae Simpson. Have I missed out any names? Ruth, who I can't see. Did I miss a name? I think I got all the names. That's 9. I did mention her. Yes. So now we're going to announce the panel, who I'm grateful said yes. They were chosen by the young people, by vote, by popular vote. We're going to invite first onto the stage Vanessa Kisuule. Vanessa, of course, was one of the judges for the Forward Prize this year. Then we're going to invite onto the stage Sarah Wimbush. Rachael Allen. And Tife Kusoro. And that's me handing over.
Thank you so much. Just before we start, I want to do a call out to Connie Greig, who was meant to co-host this panel, but unfortunately has been feeling sick. Can we just have a round of applause for her and all the work she put into it? Thank you. Welcome, everyone. It's really wonderful to be hosting this panel with poets that are tackling some of the biggest issues in our world today. Climate breakdown and worker struggle, race, migration, the violence of whiteness, and how we survive and thrive throughout all of this. Especially in this time, with the massacre that is happening right now in Gaza, where in the north all who leave their homes are being shot at and there is no food or water, with the massacres that are happening right now in Congo and in Sudan, we need writing like the writing that we have today that is able to ask these huge questions and find answers to them. So welcome, everyone. It's really an honor to have you here.
Shall we get this show on the road? So the first question is an open question to all. And this is, as an alternative bio, what do you want to be known for? Anyone can kick off. I know that's a huge question, so we'll give them a bit of time.
Do you have something?
You know, you guys are all brilliant.
I don't know if that's what you get to decide, right? I think that's why that question feels sticky to answer. I think you have the things you want to be known for or remembered for, but that's not going to be up to me ultimately. But you know, just I'm a vibe. I try to be a vibe. That I kind of care about that more than anything, honestly. Like, if people are like, oh, you know, poems mid, vibes 10, I'm happy with that, rather than the other way around. If I have to choose over being the best poet in the world or being a vibe, it's the latter. I'm ashamed to say, but that's my truth. I
can confirm that Vanessa is indeed a vibe.
Yeah, so that's what I want to be known for.
I have no idea. Yeah, because like you said, you can't really control what you're known for. But I think maybe like being kind to people, being like generally good is enough for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I would hope for that too.
Yeah, it's the same kind of theme, because I find when I was a young poet, well, when I was a young person.
Oh.
So I started writing later in life and wouldn't have been able to be a poet without the generosity of the poetry community. And so I'd like to think that I'm a kind of generous poet in return and sort of help other people out as well. That'd be nice.
Thank you.
That's really lovely. We're going to have some questions that are for everybody and some questions that are for specific poets or judges. Here. For the questions for everyone, maybe if one person can answer, or maximum two people, because we have about 5 minutes per question. And the first question, which is for everybody, and I think relevant to all of your work, do you think a poet is politically responsible for the subjects that they choose to tackle? Like, what is the poet's relationships to the social movements that tackle the themes that are in their work? Big question.
They're big, and we were sent them in advance as well. So you'd think we'd be armed and ready with the juicy answers. But I think it's important to give these questions real thought and not just offer platitudes or surface level bumper sticker aphorisms. I think it's really hard, and actually, continually as a writer, I don't know if you feel this. You confront often the feeling that your words aren't doing anything, are sort of being flung into the void and aren't having any sort of real concrete impact on the issues that you care about. And then the question really does become, what is the role? Is it simply to bear witness, to speak the thing, or are we trying to agitate? Are we actually trying to change minds, inform and change policy? How can we actually make poetry less of a cognitive, intellectual exercise of, what are we naming things, and actually how are we contributing to the grassroots activism and sites of change that we are aligned with. And I think it's possible to do both. They both have their importance. The semantics of what we call ourselves, naming something a genocide as opposed to other strange dances with words we can make around what we're seeing in the world. But I also believe in the really grounded things that poetry can do in activist spaces, and we shouldn't be afraid to be in those rooms. And poetry can do a lot, I think, in those environments where there's a certain rhetoric that is constant, and sometimes poetic language can really help invigorate and disrupt for people that are very used to having to relate to people in one particular register. So I've seen poetry do really cool stuff in those spaces.
Yeah, I think perhaps maybe naively but also ambitiously, I do think that language and naming and semantics and form can materially affect and change the world, like naming something a genocide when in other spaces there's a reticence to own up to the reality of the situation. And I also think that with all different kinds of poetries come different levels of structural material change. And for me, poetry feels very close to thinking, which is nuanced and contradictory and difficult and strange and uncontainable. And the fact that poetry replicates that space in language feels to me like the most authentic way of wrestling and grappling with difference and naming and strangeness of the world and our close communities and our far communities. And I think there are various ways that we can sort of compartmentalize an activism in the world and a writing about political, social, cultural situations and conundrums, and actually playing in that gap and that tension and working to bind them or dislocate them feels to me like the most generative space to make work.
That's really beautiful. Thank you.
So institutions, publishers have stated that they wanted more marginalized voices, but writers can often become pigeonholed in writing those stories. what are the steps educators, publishers, and editors can make to encourage these writers to write the stories that they want to but are too afraid to?
This is nice. I'm an editor, so I noticed some eyes on me. I think as someone who is an editor and also somebody with parents who are cleaners, from working class communities, I'm very suspicious and alert to the various ways that books from various communities are marketed back to us. And I think that there is an extraordinary amount of pigeonholing and compartmentalizing that happens within mainstream publishing, probably primarily. I have always worked with smaller presses, independent presses, presses that maybe don't have the same kind of financial shareholder pressures that the larger publishing houses would have to kind of sell hundreds and thousands of copies, millions of copies of a book. And I think that this freedom that you talk about is something that I grapple with a lot, I think about a lot, I toy with, and comes down to maybe just breaking open the kind of structural inequality that still exists for me in publishing, of a kind of very sort of upper middle class, group of people who are dictating who they believe stories are for and who is writing these stories. And I think we are dismantling as we speak right now. Things are being like broken apart in a really invigorating way. And I think a lot of that work happens in a small press space, actually, and in rooms like this and in spaces like this. And I think just, if you have a position at a publishing house, shutting up sometimes, just letting other people speak, and just don't replicate the poor behavior of the past is sort of what I tell myself as a bit of a mantra. Make room.
Anyone else?
Cool. Our next question is for Sarah. Specifically, Sarah is the author of the collection Strike, about the miners' strike. It's interesting that your collection is not just responding to the strike history in general, but specifically to the archives of the miners' strike, a way that this history is being officially remembered. Can you tell us more about your process of writing in response to these images? Like, what type of response, rewriting, or insight into history were you aiming for, and why?
That's a big question. The miners' strike was a massive event in 1984, certainly where I came from, but I know it wasn't that big in the whole country. I know somebody who lived down south who just had no idea what was going on, that she said later. And it wasn't, people kind of think of it as like this massive snap of activism and protest that just kind of happened out of nowhere, whereas working class people have been, at the sharp end protesting for a long time. If you think back to the general strike and the suffrage movement and the Chartists, and, it's part and parcel of being from these working class communities. So I know it was actually about the miners' strike, my book, specifically, but it was about the bigger picture as well, especially towards the end. It kind of throws a nod to the decline, the deindustrialisation, particularly of the north, but of the whole country. There was the steel workers and the dockers and the print unions. They all kind of were affected by the miners' strike because it was such a massive event. When the miners were broken, it sort of exposed all the trade unions to having this kind. They were weakened basically. So it was a huge event, and I wanted to capture it in all its rawness. So I wrote about it at the time, as if it was at the time. So 1984. Most of the poems, apart from a couple of later poems, are written at the moment, and I was trying to capture just the whole crazy way it sort of played out. So it is chronological. I can't remember what the rest of the question was. That was too many all in one go for me.
Sorry. Yeah, no, that was really good. And I guess part of the question is like, what was the process for you of writing in response to images from the archive specifically?
Well, when it first, because I wrote this book really quickly in a very short space of time because I knew the strike was coming up. And so it kind of all started as a pamphlet, and I was using photographs as prompts, because that's a really great way of creating poetry, isn't it? Using those kinds of prompts. So it started off as a pamphlet, and then I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could write a collection? And it kind of rolled on, and I was using photographs all the time, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could use the photographs? And it was all really last minute, and credit to Stairwell Books, which is a very small but snappy Yorkshire publisher who just took it up and ran with it. I hadn't even written all the poems. In fact, they just said, yeah, this looks great. You're going in the right direction. So it was something different, and hats off to the judges, at the Forward Prize for actually selecting it, because, I don't think there's ever been another poetry book with photos in it, in a shortlisting. I don't know if there has or not.
Caleb Femi's, maybe.
Oh, right.
But it's not very common.
No, not very common. And also it's quite, it's a very intense book, and of the time and of that particular culture. And it's a long time ago. And I thought, well, I never ever thought it would get selected, because it does reflect what's happening at the moment, because what happened then is feeding into what happens, that sort of neoliberal sort of society that we now live in was all sort of born out of that time. So yeah, I'm just thrilled to be here. It's wonderful.
We're very happy to have you too.
Thank you.
So we've spoken a bit about bearing witness, and we've spoken about writing into activism. Can we speak a little bit about the ethics of working with archives as well, and writing as a form of activism? Where does ethics play within all of this and in your process?
I'm actually really interested in whether you contacted some of the people in the pictures, whether there was a dialogue at all with people that featured, because I think that ties in a lot to the ethical question. Were there people that you wanted to reach out to or attempted to reach out to that were included in the images?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. A lot are dead.
Yeah,
But ethics, it was... You have to be really careful when you're writing from photographs, because I didn't get in touch with any of the people because there just wasn't even... I didn't even think about that, to be honest. There wasn't even time. But when you're writing from a photograph, photographs can be very, it's just an angle, it's just a snapshot. It doesn't always represent the whole picture. So you have to be really careful when you're writing from photographs. And it's very easy to fall into that trap of maybe capturing a story. You've got to have an angle, haven't you? But how do you manage it? And so this book had to come from a certain angle. But it was important to try to reflect what was going on as the bigger picture as well in the poems. It's I don't know if that makes sense.
Anyone else around ethics and writing their own, or writing towards a community, a specific community, or writing from archive?
I can't speak to archive. I've not had that specific experience, but I do think it's really it's dicey being a writer and having essentially the say. Even when we get to the interpersonal and you write from your experience, you write about your family, you write about your ex, and it's the Adele effect, innit? It's like, what you put on wax becomes the story in people's minds. And I don't know, the Gemini in me kind of loves that, that sort of, I have like a little gleeful chuckle. Even if someone's doing me wrong, I'm like, But the record will show that this is how it went down, This is why you shouldn't date other writers, because then they're doing clapbacks. then it's back and forth. No. So, yeah, I think about this a lot as someone that writes. if not always explicitly autobiographically, always informed by my experiences. And I think you have to think about that even more when you're thinking about archive, about community, speaking to, I don't like the term marginalized, but communities that are often underrepresented within the media, within the arts. And Max Porter did an amazing radio, like 4-part radio series recently called The War Photographer. Big up Caroline Duffy, The War Photographer, GCSE, English, like, woo. But yeah, just like the terrible murkiness of documenting the horrors that go on in the world with this veneer of honouring and bearing witness, but also the voyeurism of that, the inherent objectification of that. And I think writing it can be another form of that. And I don't think there is a way to do it that is wholly ethical. I think it always remains strange, fraught, difficult. You can sort of give yourself the justification, the way of wrapping it up so that you can sleep at night, but there will always potentially be someone who feels as though something wasn't quite as fair or as widespread or as thorough as it could have been. So I think as a writer, you have to make your peace with that. I mean, do your best, do your due diligence, but it's hard, particularly if you don't want to write something sort of fluffy and aggrandizing. If you want to also speak to like the gnarliness of people.
I have this like defense of poetry as the most ethical art form because I feel like it's inherently self-reflexive. Formally, it's kind of always acknowledging itself because it has such an artificial frame, which is detailed in Veronica Forrest Thompson's book about artifice and poetry, which is absolutely amazing. But this idea of something being able to like recognize that it's a kind of false arena that is speaking a truth, but a truth that's been made artificial through the very form of a poem. And I like the idea that a poem is kind of aware of itself as something that's in the murky bits. And I do think that a lot of other art forms don't really do that, but I love poetry more than all other art forms, so I would say that.
Thank you very much. That was very good.
I think you have the next question.
Can you talk to us about the process of transforming the seed of an idea into a full body of work? So we're thinking about the ordering of poems, we're thinking about sectioning books, the themes that we're putting within the book. Anyone?
I've got you haven't said anything in a hot minute. Oh, feed the children.
I've never written in poetry anyway, like a full body of work. So I don't know how to, and I think that's also something that I have found, maybe that's made me reluctant to up to this point, is like, I know how to write a poem, but then when it comes to writing a group of poems in like a pamphlet or a collection, like, how do you do that and like have all the poems like speak to each other or be part of some sort of wider narrative? It's not something I've achieved yet or like fully attempted to do. But I would say like in terms of a single poem, like how I go about like going from like the seed of an idea to a full poem is always just like, I guess like following the thread of where like a thought goes or I feel I always feel like poetry comes to me quite unexpectedly, of like, I never know where a poem is going to go or what it's really about until it's finished or until I've like edited it again or like found something in it that wasn't initially there when the first line came or something. But yeah, it's just following the thread for me.
Do you feel like you'll follow that logic when you're building a larger?
I don't know, because I feel like when it comes to thinking about like a larger piece of work, I would feel the pressure to know where it's going or to like know like what's this book about before I start it. Like where's it going and almost like what's the point of it? Yeah. But with a single poem, I never feel that.
It's hard. It's really hard. And I'm thinking about, go with me on this. This is a little bit of a sidestep, but I'm thinking about Pink Pantheress, okay? And, you know, she's very popular with the kids and that. And she was interviewed by somebody and they were like, oh, you know, how did you think about the track listing? And she was like, I don't think about that. She was like, is that something people think about? She was like, I just recorded the songs and like, that was kind of it. And at first I was furious. I was like, what do you mean you didn't, like, you know, an album is a journey. There's supposed to be an arc. You're supposed to be, you know, thinking about this stuff. And then I was like, okay, there's kind of something kind of anarchic and great about that too. She was just like, do you know what I mean? You know, she let fate take care of that. So I do wonder whether there is a trust you can have in that you are the through line, or there is through lines in a body of work that even you can't see sometimes. Yeah. And that's the beauty of the editor-writer relationship and that collaboration. An editor can help you to zoom out and go, oh, did you notice there's a motif here? Or I feel like there's a cluster going on here and there's a cluster going on there. And maybe these guys, you know, great as they are, don't really belong in this constellation. And that's where it gets cool, because I think when you're in the weeds of your work, it's a bit like, I don't know. You know what I mean? So you can have that beautiful, like, you know, curated thing, or you can Pink Pantheress it, and like apparently no one can stop you. So there you go.
Yeah, it's like Jesus take the wheel, kind of.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. And next question is for you, and it's about judging, a question that I think a lot of us poets are very nosy about.
Judging, yeah.
Which is, you know, how do you judge a poem? What are the criteria that you...
I don't know. I judged the Roundhouse Slam, the Four Young Poets, this. You know, I selected for the Little Betty pamphlets, and you know, I run a collective with another poet, Will Harris, who's incredible, and you know, have to pick 15 people out of this year, 500 plus people. So I'm constantly supposed to be making assessments on what is good. I don't know what's good. I know what intrigues me. I know what makes my brain go fizzy. It's not always a pleasure or a recognition. It's like a what's going on here, you know? And I think increasingly, because I've been doing this a long time now, being met by something that feels like it's going down familiar grooves in my brain doesn't feel as great as stuff that actually weirds me out, or things that aren't quite like anything else that I've read. That to me is what I want to go towards. And also I always want to learn from other people. Like even when I'm in a facilitator role, I'm always wanting to geek out with other people. And that's a far more exciting dynamic when that writer is so different to you, and has, you know, reference points that are just on the other end of the spectrum to yours. So yeah, I don't know how to judge, honestly. I just be vibes in. And that's why I love being on a panel. I love being on a panel because actually, if I had to make these choices by myself, I'd feel really fraudulent. And I'm not trying to undermine my own subjectivity or my taste, or the fact that I've been doing this a long time. But, you know, I say this to say that, like, I don't even care who you are. I don't care what poet you are, what editor you are. Like, you're still just a person. You're just some random off the street. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're just who we are. We're just humans. You know, you strip away the credentials, you strip away all this other stuff. Like, you're still a person looking at some words going, like, what do I think of this? You know? And actually, the more I learn and the more I seem on the surface to be more equipped and more authoritative to make such decisions, the more I'm like, this is this is smoke and mirrors, man. This is whatever. I think I'm a good judge. If I was to say I'm a good judge, I think it's because I love this thing. I love it. Geek out about it. I'm excited by it. Love the people in it, and that is the engine more so than like, here I am with my MFA and, you know, my terminology and I don't have an MFA. But you know what I mean? That's not what's informed my process through poetry. I've kind of like learned about the mechanisms of it through like just being here long enough and stealth. But I think that it's the love for, it's the vibes that steer my judging process, because sometimes you can't even see really.
I feel like you're really living up to your wanting to be known for vibes ambitions.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel not great about that, because I'm like, oh, am I all vibes and no actual substance? But again, like I said, that's for other people to decide. I know that I enjoy what I do and give a fuck about what I do. And I just think that's the best reason to do anything, not for like baubles or clout or so people think you're super smart or whatever. Just love it here, guys. You know what I mean? That's it. That's
Real.
all. So we're thinking about different art forms or genres, and we have some esteemed writers who not only write poetry. Can you talk to us about your transition to other forms? Tife?
Yeah. So when I started writing, I sort of started with poetry when I was in school, just because it was like a form of self-expression, and it was just a bit like random, and it helped me feel like I had a voice when I was really young. And then sort of explored like short story writing as well. And then when I was maybe like 16, I discovered like writing theatre and writing scripts, because I saw a TV show and I was like, this is so inspiring. And then I was like, maybe I could write it as well. And then I sort of, I feel like I spent my teenage years just like exploring different things and seeing what stuck and what felt good to me. And I think I, for ages, have seen myself as more of like a playwright or like a script writer than a poet, because poetry to me always felt so like personal and almost like secret, and almost like, I'm writing about my feelings, but like who really would read it, or like it doesn't feel like big and important. And with theatre, it felt like, I felt like maybe I could write stuff that was like big and like political, or like all of that stuff that I felt like people saw as important or like relevant. But more and more, I think after I did the Roundhouse Poetry Collective a couple of years ago, I felt like so much freedom in like exploring what poetry was to me. And like it felt like you can write about your feelings and your own personal journeys and experiences, and that is important. And that is like, I just felt so much freedom with poetry that I haven't felt in like other mediums that I've written in. So yeah, I think more and more now, like I write poems, and it still feels a bit like a secret, or like even though obviously it's not, because I'm like here, but it still feels like like deeply personal. And I feel for some reason with poetry more confidence to be personal than I do with other stuff, which is maybe why I enjoy it.
I love that for you. Vanessa, novelist extraordinaire. Do you tell us how you transitioned?
Oh, niece, stop it. Sorry, go.
No, I want to know how you jumped from poetry to
did I jump?
never
Did I stumble?
went.
I wanted to actually ask you because she has a play on at the Royal Court. Is it still
It's
on?
finished.
It's
It's
finished.
finished.
She had a play, and Royal Court is like
Bam, 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 bam.
It doesn't get more prestigious than that in British theatre, so that is a huge deal. So congrats. But I was going to ask you whether you feel as though that poetic sensibility finds its way into how you write scripts. I'm interested in that, because it will tie into what I'm going to say. But would you say that that's something that happens?
Yeah, I would say more and more nowadays it does. It sort of feels like it's helping me to write a different kind of play than I would have earlier in my career when I wasn't writing poetry. It definitely feeds in.
What I really love is when poets, I'm not going to use the word transition because that implies like a journey from one thing to the next that's fixed, but, sort of a move between different mediums. When it succeeds, I think it's a real testament to the groundwork that poetry does for you in making you think about language in the most granular way possible. So even if you go on to write a play that's maybe quite traditional in its form, naturalistic, etc., you're thinking about every aspect of what those words are doing on the page. So, the rhythm of the dialogue, whether you want this particular, sort of round sound for how this person speaks, or someone else is more clipped, more staccato. These are all poetic notions, I think, that a playwright might have without having come through poetry, but I think poetry makes you more aware of these things. And so when I think about, Inua Ellams and Sabrina Mahfouz, people that have then gone on to write for theatre and telly, you can tell that their hand is in it. They're people that think about the muscle of language, and how that works in a live space, which I think is very cool. Even Michaela Cole, she was doing small spoken word back in the day. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like, again, it shows in her work, and the fact that she comes from theatre and then brings that slightly weirder sensibility of theatre into the television she makes. So yeah, as a person who's just written a creative nonfiction, I hate how unwieldy that term is, book, that jump. Again, I don't know if it was a jump, man. It felt more like a stumble. It was really hard. It was really, really hard because poems, they're these bursts. They're really concentrated. They're like a swig of Ribena with no water. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and how long is my book? Like 220 pages. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's a lot of words, man. I was just like, I maybe got a bit of a third of the way through and I was like, really, more? I've got to write more? I ran out of steam a lot. I was supposed to write that book in 1 year. It took me 4. Oh boy. So yeah, it was not a jump. It was a long, slow, agonizing process. I think because I think about words so intensely, and when you're writing something discursive, if you're there like the syntax of this sentence, but doing that for like a month, and your editor's like, yo, I've been waiting for a month and you've sent me a paragraph, babes, this is not, we cannot go at this pace. So it wasn't a jump. Twas a trip and land sort of just about at the finish line. So yeah, it was. It's done. I did it.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
The next question is for you, Rachael. There's this line that is in your collection, which is how to have sat as a child at a murderer's feet and not have been murdered. And me and Connie were talking about this line, and we're thinking about the lack of subject, the lack of I, and the way it speaks to the dissociative pain of memory, the removal of the self from grief. And the question is, to what degree does poetry do that? Does it remove the self from a painful experience, even if there is the I, even if we literally had our name in it, but the process of writing it kind of takes us out of it? Is it a universality of personal pain? Are you in it? Are you out of it? What is it like for you?
That's such an amazing question. Thank you. And I think this maybe loops back to the question about ethics, because, forgive me, I'm a very slow thinker, so I'm sort of still probably in last week somewhere before I get to this point. But I'm very interested in poetry and how we can scramble perspective or acknowledge that our perspectives are wayward, but also localized and intimate and immediate and subjective, but that we have such an inherent interest in how others see the world, how we have historically seen the world, how we see ourselves historically, how we see through other beings. And a big part of God Complex is how we run ourselves alongside cultural attitudes to ecological spaces, animal-human relationships, which are the oldest thing, nearly as old as poetry. And I think I'm very interested in a number of poets who also deal with violences towards women and violences towards ecological spaces. And I've noticed in a number of these poets that I look to often, people like Sylvia Legree, May Bursenbrugger, Ariana Reins, they will self-reflexively acknowledge their own perspective in a situation, in an event, in a climate catastrophe, and implicate themselves, but also acknowledge that they are on the receiving end of damage, contamination, trauma. And I think about pronoun usage in poetry collections, and something like Claudia Rankine's Citizen is the sort of master class in how we implicate, how we are implicated within books, within situations, cultural events, how we witness, how we are implicated in witnessing. And, you know, just very specifically, and in the Minyashai, that is a memory for me, but I see myself in that memory. I don't remember being in the memory. And I guess you can think about the intellectual framing of arriving at a line like that, which so often just drills down to the experience of how you sit in it in the present moment. She's so fucking smart.
Literally. Taking notes over here.
Thank you.
And finally, what are the questions you ask yourself or the work when editing or deciding which publisher to go to or agent to work with or community to build? That's a broad question, but yeah.
It's a really good question. I've been thinking about this a lot, actually. Sarah, do you have any thoughts?
I don't. Well, it's difficult because I've always been drawn to certain publishers because of the poets that I read, you know, in their stable kind of thing. So I've always liked the poetry business because there's lots of poets that I enjoy there. Because of some of the poets in the poetry business I know, so that kind of, you know, that feeds into that. And I really wanted to be published with Blood Axe because there's masses of poets in there that I just love. So I was very lucky with that. And I think it's about selecting somebody that kind of fits you, you know, a bit like a coat. So it's not just about them publishing you, it's about who else they publish and their ethos and that kind of thing. So.
I think what's very hard about the writer-editor relationship is that unless you've already worked with that person, so if we're thinking about a first book, or even if it's not your first book, your first time working with a publisher and their editor, you might really admire other books that they've worked on. You might have a few exchanges you've had with them and they've seemed really nice, but you actually don't know what the rapport is until you're in it. And you don't have to be like best buddies with your editor. I don't think it's necessarily about that. I think you have to get on fundamentally. But the person who's going to push you and make your work the best it can be isn't necessarily someone that you want to then go to the pub with after. But I think there is like a language, a shorthand, a real sense of connectivity that is really hard to explain, that you need to have with your editor. Because there's a competency that will always be there in terms of someone who can tell you, oh, you know, maybe we don't need this poem, or, oh, you know, have you thought about chopping off the last line? You know, all of these sorts of things. But then there is the symbiosis of two people that, you know, like when you get to a point with someone that you've known for ages where like you make like a series of like sounds that aren't even words, but you understand each other, right? If you've like had housemates or whatever, you know, the two of you would be like, and they'd be like, and you're like, understood, right? It's like that with an editor and a writer. And I think, you know, Toni Morrison said it. It's like, you know, I don't come here to be like gassed, you know, like, you know, an editor should be dispassionate. They shouldn't, you know, love you or hate you. They should really be just with the work, you know, very cool-eyed, and have like a real respect for it, the work and you, that isn't pandering, but isn't cruel. It's like, you know, so many things have to balance. And actually, I think it's quite rare that it's like perfect. And if you ever get that with an editor, like, take that and just like, because it builds on itself and it gets better over time. But it's kind of hard because you don't know. You might meet an editor and be like, I don't, they seem a bit I don't think we're really, but then you get into it, you're like, oh, they're great for my work. They're great for my work. And then someone who you get on really well with, but actually editorially, they're not the best for you. That's quite hard to know and to tell until you're quite a bit way in it, unfortunately. But I don't know how you feel as someone on the other side of that.
Yeah,
dynamic.
I mean, you articulate it so well, this idea of sort of boundaries and suitability in regards to the kind of intellectual project that you're going to be collaborating on, and this very unique kinship, which is we share this space, which is ultimately yours.
Yes.
But I am here to help. I'm guiding this. I'm the vehicle through which this is going to travel, which has a lot of responsibility on it, especially because I'm actually quite a bad proofreader. So we get to a point and I'll be like, oh, where does the full stop go? Is it inside the quotes or outside the quotes? And they look at me and they're like, this is literally your job. But I'm good at the big structural bits and the kind of attachment to the, I guess, the meat or the substance of the book. And I have authors who I've worked with for a very, very, very long time now. And I feel like the biggest part of the editorial relationship for me is spending a lifetime with someone's writing who I adore and I believe is necessary for the world. And I love being an editor as much as I love writing, if not a little bit more.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you so much. Give it a hand for this lovely panel, guys. Thank you so much for your wisdom. So we'll be transitioning into the next segment. But before that, a lovely Q&A. So does anyone have any questions for our lovely panel? We have about room for one or two. Yeah, at the back. Should I?
I'm worried that my train's at 2:30.
Oh, do you think, what time's it now? 1:45. I mean, we're pretty close to the station. Have you got all your stuff? Yeah. I reckon
Cool.
if you leave in 15. You'll be all right.
Thank you.
Question on the editing thing. Do you find it difficult to get out of the way as an editor in terms of your own sensibilities,
Move
in
out
terms
the
of what
way.
you like? And if so, how do you kind of overcome that?
For me? Yes, I do find it hard to get out of the way. And I overcome that. Well, I think it's interesting because I'll be very sure of the shape that I think a book should be in. And I'll, have these wonderful generative tussles with my authors about what should happen. And sometimes we'll get to a point at the end and I'll go, oh God, I think we should put that back in actually. Or they'll be like, you were so right, we need to get it out. But I think a big tenet of mine is not to rush anything and to give thinking space and time, which is a reaction to, I think, the speed at which we believe we're supposed to work, especially in an industry, in a cultural industry, in a publishing industry. And I don't like to make firm decisions. I like to sort of holistically move the book to the space that I believe it should be in its final form. And if it gets delayed, it gets delayed because there's only one moment that it's published. It's not changing after that. Yeah. And time is the most important thing for me. So I always, I'm often just saying to my authors, we can slow this down and it'll be better for you. And more often than not, it helps us get to the decisions in a way that feels has slight more integrity, perhaps. Yeah.
Hi. Just first to say that Tife and Sarah, I thought yesterday was great, so really, really enjoyed your readings. I've got another question for you, Rachael. How did you find yourself getting into editing and editorial work? Because with poetry, it seems dead easy. You just apply to prizes and you apply to different opportunities, but then with editor work, that seems harder.
I like this question a lot because at university I started publishing zines of poetry with the people who were in my year at Goldsmiths, and we made anthologies and we put on big parties and held exhibitions, and I have been making books since I was 18 years old, and it feels very much in my soul as much as writing does to just sort of create books and put them into the world. And I've done it in many different formats. And I think that beyond, you know, if I wasn't paid to do it then, I'm paid to do it now. If I wasn't paid to do it, I'd still do it. I make books that I'm not paid to make with small presses that I run, like Monitor Books, which is an amazing small press, shout out. And I'm just like a real nerd about book making and publishing. And, you know, in a material sense, in an administrative sense, I did lots of unpaid internships, lived in a shed in London for a while, got a job at Granta magazine, and they retained me, and I worked there for a decade, publishing poems in the magazine, moving into publishing books, and now I'm at Fitzcarraldo, where I've started another list, and it just feels very much like luck, situation, pushing, you know. But I also, because of my background, I don't like this idea that you're told that it's impossible to get into publishing or whatever, because you can do it yourself, literally. Like, I would steal paper from goldsmiths to make books. And so I advocate thievery. Yeah.
Just really quickly, are there any opportunities that you think like that you'd direct anyone who was interested to?
Well, what I did, I don't know if it's the same now, I guess, but like, I mean, for a while, when I was making books with Clinic, which was my small press for a very long time, I was just on all social medias, and I would just like follow publications, magazines, journals, and just write to them. Like, I just wrote to people.
Stalk.
Yeah, I stalked. I stalked and I stole. So I think this sort of, but I mean, there's also, I realised that I am, I don't know, again, naive, perhaps. And I was just like, can I work for you? But I'm not that confident necessarily, but I was just like, I want to do this thing, so maybe I'll do it. And I do think there's more openings now, but there's a harder journey. It's a very different journey from when I was starting. I was like a Tony Blair, New Labour education child. And yeah, Tory rule has decimated, but I still believe, more than ever, I believe we should just be making our own stuff and putting it into the world. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, this is a question that might be open to everyone. I know we talked about sort of pigeonholing and on the onus of publishers, but I actually think that like something that I've struggled with as a writer is that I'm like, when you are pigeonholed by certain groups, you also know what is expected of you to write. And like, have any of you struggled with that, to be able to find like what you actually want to write? Because quite often when we're trying to get published and we know this publisher publishes this, or this publisher's called out for this, and like I might tick those boxes, but actually is that what I want to write? Has anyone struggled with that? And how do we get around that and find out what we actually want to write a little bit more? And how do we make that sustainable so that we can still get published, but we also are writing about things that we really care about and representing ourselves in that way?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's really hard because, you know, not to feed into this notion of scarcity, I really want to echo what Rachael said about, like, make your own culture, make your own scene. Like, you know, I came up in spoken word, and, you know, I remember one of the first nights I went to was Chill Pill, which was basically founded by people who are now some of the biggest poets in the scene. So it's like, you know, Raymond Antrobus, Deanna Roger, Adam Cameling, Simon Mole, who now writes like kids books, and their resident DJ, like Mr. G, right? And it was like in this like random little basement in Bethnal Green, and like we were losers, man. We were in there, we were doing all like embarrassing, you know, like spoken word poems. You know, I was 18, and just, you know, went up there every week. And, you know, they did that off their own backs. And, you know, that was, you know, 10 plus years ago, you know, to hire that equivalent space probably would cost you 3 times the amount, right? And, you know, we're more frazzled and tired in this post-COVID, post-Brexit, post-sense world. But history shows us that people have made art and made culture despite the madness of the world in all times and in all contexts and all places. If you want that, you can build that. Not even despite, but because of the madness, you know? So please, like, if you feel like presses and competitions and commissions are not creating the space for you to make the things you want to make that space for yourself. I understand the imperative to go for things that are offering you money. We need money, or exposure to certain institutions or mentors that might be helpful to you. But I'm a believer in, like, you know, playing the game a little bit. You know, you go there, you do your poem about being brown, or, like, you know, growing up on an estate, or whatever the fuck it is. But there's ways to do that and be subversive within that, right? You can start from a place and then take it somewhere different. Or you can give them what the fuck they want, you know, give them their boilerplate thing. And then you're in the door and you can make what you want to make, right? There's, like, so many ways to work with and against the institutions that have things to offer you and to propel you, but also ultimately are going to smother and minimize really crucial aspects of your artistry. But I don't know, man. You've got to have some flexibility and some suppleness and some cheekiness about you. And I can't stress enough how, like, you just have to, like, stick around. You just have to be dogged. Do you know what I mean? That more than anything, I think, is it. Like, when you're just around long enough, someone will be like, you're always at these events, or like you're always liking all our posts, or, like, do you know what I mean? People are like, oh, do you want to come and do this thing? And there might have been someone who was just as talented or capable as you, who just stopped showing up to things and stopped liking the posts and stopped engaging with the magazines or whatever else, understandably, because it's tiring. But, like, just be around and stay around. And be bait, be that face that people always see. So yeah, being pigeonholed is gross, but, like, have fun with it. Like, you know, we talk about poetic constraint all the time. Being pigeonholed is a constraint. Play with it. It's a formal game, right? It's like, how can I look like I'm doing what they want me to do and, like, still find a way to do what I want? Do you know what I mean? Like have fun with it.
That's the system, everyone. Thank you so much for the amazing wisdom. So thank you guys again. We'll transition into the next session, but first we'll just do a quick reshuffle.
Okay. And please, poets, don't leave the room, because we're now going to have the
leave the room,
announcement
we've
of
locked the
the
doors.
prize, of the Young Poets Prize.
Thank you so much, guys.
You are literally the most intelligent human being on the planet. It's frightening, actually. So nice.
Running for the train. Good luck. The microphone. Where's it going? Introduce that. Sorry.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for your attention. This is the very important announcement. So the judges have made their own prizes for the categories, and they're going to be announcing their prizes now. So please bear with us as we get through these. Who's starting?
So, do you want to just give? So we had an interesting task of reading all the collections, watching all the videos of the performances and so on, and it was actually quite, like, battling for your book, or, like, what you want to move forward is actually more challenging. And I think we all retrospectively thought about every time we submitted to somewhere, whether it's a prize or a publication, and thought about our rejection process. And it's actually, don't take that to heart, rejections, because it is like you're battling against great poems, and your poem as well is great. And on the day, it can just be the fact that one judge, I mean, Ruth had us over here. Like, I had my own thoughts of which book I was going to battle for, and Ruth came with, like, these political like presentations of why her book, deserves to win. And I was like,
I'm a middle child. I know how to argue for my position.
Exactly. So it's just like sometimes these decisions go based off arguments within the panel, but these lovely individuals will tell us what we came out with.
Fantastic. I'm gonna stand just because I can. I'm on a stage. It's really lovely to be here. It was such an honour and a privilege to read all the work of all the poets. And yeah, I learned so much from it. We're gonna do best single poem first. I've got an envelope that I haven't lost. She had an envelope that she hadn't lost. For best single poem, it was a really, really difficult category. There were 5 incredible poems with such a diverse range of content and form. The poem that we've decided that won, for me, was a poem that stayed with me for such a long time. Like, I still find myself revisiting lines. It provoked such a visceral emotion in me. It was really great when Vanessa said vibes, because I was just like, the vibes of this poem are on point. So the shadow judges have chosen for best single poem, The Only Other Dark-Skinned Girl by Tife Kisuule.
Hello everyone. I'm going to be announcing the result for Best Performed Poem, and this poem stood out to us for its humour, for the power of its direct address, and it blew us away really. And the poem we chose was Dear John Berger by Leila Josephine.
So I'm going to be sharing our choice for best first collection, and it was really, really tough, as the others said. And I think we kind of landed at this choice. For me, it's a collection that deals with such huge issues that are both national and global, but on such an intimate and personal level. And I showed up ready to fight for this collection, and I'm so glad I'm the person that gets to say this. So we chose American Anthem by Kelly Michaels.
Last and not least, I'll be announcing the shadow judges winner for best collection. The quality of the work across this category was so high. For me, it was personally the most difficult one to separate between and rank. The work we selected is a statement of life in the shadow of death's chemical clouds, a tuberous, sometimes arcane but always sharp message for those who want to listen. Our winner is Ferdi Judah with open brackets, ellipsis, close brackets.
I'll hand over to the producers.